Abramovich to its sanction list against Russian oligarchs. We got some details through in the last couple of minutes about what that means, including that Chelsea will not be allowed to be put up for sale. There'll be no transfers, no new tickets if you're not a season ticket holder, no kit sold in clubs either, essentially a football club put on ice to a large degree. Let's speak to the Conservative MP for Lichfield, that is Michael Fabricant, who joins us down the line. Michael, very good afternoon to you. First of all, your thoughts on Roman Abramovich. What would you say to those Chelsea fans who might feel aggrieved about what's happening to their club and frankly, maybe not understand it?
I think most people do understand it. Everybody's watching the news. I think everybody's been absolutely horrified by what's happened, particularly the bombing of the young children's home in Mariupol yesterday. I'd be very surprised, actually, if any Chelsea fans had a great deal of sympathy for Abramovich.
In saying that, I suppose what I'm trying to get at in terms of understanding it is, has the government been clear to people that many of these sanctions, they have a boomerang effect, and they affect us as well? It's the same with energy prices and inflation. Are people, do you think, are your constituents that you've spoken to prepared, happy that these sanctions are necessary, but also that they will hit us as well at home?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. I think people are very, very pleased that there are sanctions. I'm not so sure that people understand what the consequences in Britain will be for those sanctions. And I think it would actually be quite helpful if the Prime Minister, in fact, I will suggest this to him, were to address the nation rather like he used to do very regularly with COVID, and explain what we are doing, but what the possible consequences might be for the British public. We know already that fuel prices are going up. They're going up all over the world. In 2 weeks' time, Rishi Sunak will be presenting his spring statement. So hopefully there will be some mitigation, some additional mitigation for that. But what's going to happen in the future? That needs to be explained. But like everything in the future, nobody knows for sure what the consequences will be. We don't know how long this war will be going on for. I noticed, by the way, Volodymyr Zelensky has just tweeted that he has spoken this morning to Boris Johnson and President Macron. He says he's discussed the war crimes of Russia against the Ukrainian people, but he's also talked about further military support that he will get from the United Kingdom. We've already supplied now 3,615 NLAW, very, very effective anti-tank, anti-military vehicle, ground-to-ground missile systems to the Ukrainians. We supplied many of them before the war began because we anticipated that this was going to happen. We're also supplying javelins. Interesting that he tweets that with President Macron, he focused on peace talks with the president. And of course, this is what President Macron is trying to present to the French people as he faces a general election, that he can negotiate peace with Putin. Well, I just wonder whether the French people believe that.
Well, in saying that, it is always important to carry on talking. Many would say Gerhard Schroeder, the rather disgraced, I would say, former German Chancellor in Moscow today with Vladimir Putin, doing precisely that. Michael, just to come back, though, you touched on it, didn't you, that spring statement, the mini budget we're expecting in a couple of weeks. At the moment, the government put forward 350 quid, essentially, to try and mitigate rising inflation, particularly when it comes to energy prices. Now, that was before what has happened in Ukraine. That's simply not going to cut it. They're going to have to go a hell of a lot further, aren't they?
They are. I mean, whether the nation can afford it, what it'll do for the value of the pound, I don't know. We've seen how the ruble has crashed. A ruble at the moment is now worth only half 1 penny when it used to be worth £1. So, I mean, it really has plummeted recently. We don't want to see the same thing happening here because there's got to be confidence, world confidence in the British economy. But you are right. People will need help with this. I mean, it's such a shame, actually, when you compare the United Kingdom with France, 80% of all electricity production in France is produced by 40 nuclear power stations. And of course, it was the decision of the Labour government, and sadly, the Conservatives didn't do that much about it either, to close nuclear power stations. We should be opening them, not closing it. And it's something we're now actively exploring. As also we're exploring, as Tom Harwood talked about this morning, the possible reintroduction of fracking. But none of this will happen instantly.
In fact, in some ways, those are much more medium, long-term things
That's
that may help. In the short term, too, also, we've got the expectation of a national insurance rise in just a couple of weeks. Also changes to income tax thresholds, which means the average taxpayer having to pay, in addition to the rising cost of living, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds extra tax from April. Again, is that sustainable? You're going to be hitting people in the pocket twice.
Well, it's very easy asking me because I'm a backbench MP by choice because I left the government over HS2. Look, if I were Chancellor, I can say I would like to see far greater support for individuals in what is really going to be a cost of living crisis. But it's easy for me and opposition MPs also to say, it's what can the country afford. But I will be sitting there in 2 weeks' time, and I hope that Rishi Sunak, he said when COVID began, you know, he will do everything it takes. I hope he will be able to do, he may not be able to do, but I hope he will be able to do everything it takes to try and protect people from this cost of living crisis. Now, of course, people realize it's worldwide, but when it actually affects you in the pocket, that actually isn't a great deal of comfort that others are suffering too.
Yeah, isn't that the point, though, Michael? I mean, yeah, you're right, inflation is a worldwide problem, but there are very few countries putting up taxes at precisely the same time. We'll have to wait and see what the Chancellor has to say. I just want to come and focus a little bit on the refugees as well. We're just going to pause for a moment. Let's have a listen into what Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, had to say in the Commons a little bit earlier on this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say to the Home Secretary, why does it always take being hauled into the House of Commons to make basic changes to help vulnerable people who are fleeing from the Ukraine? A maternity hospital was bombed yesterday, an attack on newborn babies and women giving birth. People are fleeing for their lives, and up to now the response from the Home Office has been a total disgrace, bringing shame upon our country. We've had a 90-year-old Holocaust survivor left in makeshift accommodation in Poland, even though her granddaughter was struggling to get here. Mums with small kids told they can't get an appointment for weeks or having to queue for days to get biometrics in freezing weather in Rzeszów, only to be told they then have to travel 200 miles to Warsaw to pick up their visas. Now, it is welcome that she's now introducing the online approach that we know they tried different ways of doing for the Hong Kong visas, but why has it taken so long when she's had intelligence for weeks, if not months, that she needed to prepare for a Russian invasion of Ukraine? And why still, if we've still got to wait until Tuesday for this new system to come in, what is to happen for everybody else in the meantime? Why is she not bringing in the armed forces? They've offered to help. We've had 1,000 troops on standby to provide humanitarian help for 2 weeks. So why not use them now to set up the emergency centres and to get people passported through as rapidly as possible and get them into the country? And what about the Ukrainian nurse here on a healthcare visa? Is she finally to be allowed to bring her elderly parents to the country, something we've asked for so long? And is this still just being restricted to those with family? Are they still going to have to fill in multiple online forms, or will she now say that all those who want to come to the UK, who have fled the fighting in Ukraine, can now come here without having to fill in loads of online forms or jump through a whole load of hoops?
Michael, is the government being inhumane in all of this, or is it simply incompetence, or maybe it's a combination of both?
You know, a great Labour Home Secretary once said, quite relatively recently, and he repeated it again recently, it was John Reid, and he said, you know, the Home Office is dysfunctional. It was dysfunctional under Labour, and in many ways it's still dysfunctional. And I think I can understand, you know, Priti Patel's utter frustration. I know that she has been trying to get the visa arrangements changed for the last few weeks. But it's like fighting through porridge in the Home Office at times. It should have been done sooner. And, I heard Yvette Cooper's rant, and I sympathise with much of what she had to say. Whether she would have been able to do any better is another question. It's the structure of the Home Office. Personally, John Reid broke up the Home Office and moved certain aspects of it into justice. I wonder whether the Home Office should be broken up still further. It's just
I
very
think, Michael,
large.
John Reid also used. I think he also used the quote that it wasn't fit for purpose, and that was because he took over from Charles Clarke, as far as I remember, who'd resigned. So maybe in politics the buck stops with the boss. Isn't it time Priti Patel, who's presided over numerous problems in the Home Office, has to take some responsibility for this?
I just think resigning is not going to help the situation. It's trying to get things done. At least we've seen this change that from next Tuesday. It's a shame it's not today, but then, that's the way things work, it seems, with the Home Office. But from next Tuesday, at least, a lot of people, the majority of refugees from Ukraine, will be able to apply for visas online. Having said that, there are particular people who are coming from Ukraine who aren't actually Ukrainian citizens. Some still hold Russian passports, just historically, they never got them changed. Some hold other passports, and they'll have to go through the system as they did before. But some of it's not really clearly understood by people. For example, there were a huge number of people who turned up, refugees at Calais, and it was a deliberate move by the government not to have a station in Calais to deal with them, because we didn't want large numbers appearing and then become subject to slave traffickers who would get them trying to get across on the English Channel, and that's not the way to do it. Because almost as many people sink in the English Channel as do get across to our shores, and that's not always actually recognised. But yes, it is an incredibly difficult situation, and I think Priti Patel is moving it as fast as she can through what I said earlier on, was a very porridgey situation, something Alan Clark discovered, something John Reid discovered, and indeed Theresa May before her.
Michael, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Michael Fabricant there, joining us from Lichfield, his constituency, the Conservative MP. Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.